Hello, one and all, and welcome to another episode of Constitution Test Review. In the first video, you learned about the first three articles about the legislative, executive, and judicial. In this video, we're going to talk about the remaining three articles. They're going to be pretty short, and then we're going to talk about the amendments that you have got to know about for the Constitution test. So this is the second video in our series to help you get prepared. Let's jump right in. Article 4, that's what those Roman numerals mean, IV, is all about relationships among the states. And it includes a few things that we don't think of often but are very handy. For example, the full faith and credit clause is what states that states have to respect each other's laws. For example, if you have your driver's license and maybe you've driven into Illinois or Arkansas or one of our neighbor states, you probably know that you don't need to get an Illinois driver's license or an Arkansas driver's license or a New York driver's license. Your one Missouri driver's license will allow you to drive all throughout America, and that's thanks in part to the full faith and credit clause. It also says in Article 4 that the citizens have to be respected, and states can't pass certain laws banning certain people from certain states. Back in the early days of American history, the states were very different. The North and South wanted different things, as you probably know if you've been in American history class. So we tried to put things in place to make sure that people wouldn't be treated differently depending on what state they're in. It also talks about the process for admitting new states and sets up the fact that Congress has to approve of any lands that want to join our country. And finally, it says that the federal government is going to guarantee that the states are going to be in charge of themselves. This is where we get the reserve powers clause as well as the 10th Amendment, and it makes sure that states are protected. Moving on to Article V, or another way to say that would be Article 5, which is all about amending the Constitution. There are two different ways of amending the Constitution. We've only ever used the first one, though, where 2/3 of Congress proposes an amendment, and then the states have to approve of that amendment. So it's a two-step process to make sure that we're getting lots of people's opinions on it and make sure that we've got some checks and balances to make sure that it's something that the national government wants to do and the states want to do. There is a second method too, where the state legislatures start the process and then Congress has to approve of it, but that's never really happened before. It is very tough to get a constitutional amendment passed. Over 4,000 have been proposed, but we only ever have 27 of them. And a lot of those were passed all at the same time, and two of them actually cancel each other out. Watch the optional video if you are interested to see which ones cancel each other out. Moving on, we are going to talk about Article 6, which talks about general ideas and general provisions about how the Constitution runs and how the government is supposed to follow it. It says that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, which means that if state wants to do something, but if it goes against the Constitution, then that state's not allowed to do it. Earlier, I talked about how during the pandemic, President Biden passed an executive order saying that everybody on trains and buses and planes had to wear masks. Eventually, the Supreme Court would step in and say that there's nothing in the Constitution about that. So the Constitution did not uphold what President Biden wanted to do, and therefore it went against the Constitution, and the Supreme Court used judicial review to get rid of it. The Article 6 also says that all people must take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. It is important to note, though, that there is no religious requirement. Even though a lot of times people will put their hand on a Bible or whatever sort of religious text they want, there's no actual part of the Constitution that supports or requires that. Last one, Article 7 is all about passing the Constitution. So this is one we really don't think about too much. It was only ever used the one time, and it said that 3/4 of the original 13 states had to approve the Constitution in order to put the Constitution in order. We still use that fraction 3/4 when we want to do things every once in a while. It's a hard number to get. To try to get 75% of Americans to agree on something is very tough to do, but the Constitution accomplished that goal, and the states agreed to do it. All right, that's the last of the 7 articles. So that is the end of the original parts of the Constitution. It was finished on September 17th, 1787. There were lots of people there who signed to the Constitution, and they took a couple of years to do it, but eventually all of the states did it, and finally George Washington was sworn in on our first president as our first president in 1789. This slide is not in your notes, though. That's just to kind of put a bow on the Constitution. But if you think back to our first unit, you know that even though the Constitution is over, there's a little bonus part of the Constitution called the amendments. We're going to talk about the first 10 today. You're going to need to know them in order to pass the Constitution test. So let's plow ahead. Back in Unit 1, we talked about these Bill of Rights. We're just going to review them very quickly. The First Amendment does 5 things. It wraps, R-A-P-P-S. It gives us the freedom of religion, assembly, press, petition, and speech. In the Constitution, it's written in a slightly different order that you see on the screen, but the First Amendment gives us the 5 rights. It means that we have the right to practice any religion we want to. We have the right to speak freely, to say what's on our mind and not have to worry about the government disliking that and coming to get us. It says that we have the right to assembly, which is a fancy word of saying meet up. We have the right to address the government and ask them to change, which is the right to a petition. And finally, we have the right to publish newspapers, TV, shows, radio, internet pages. That's the right to the freedom of the press. Again, going back to Unit 1, you might remember that a younger version of myself here in these pictures had different hand signals, one for each of your 10 fingers. So in these hand signals, you see that we have got the right to the freedom of speech, so people can't tell you to shush. So again, we're using one finger to represent the First Amendment. You have the right to believe whatever you want is up in the sky, the freedom of religion. You have the right to press and press down on a table. You have the right to assemble, like everybody get together, we're having a talk, and you have the right to petition, so you can sign your name with one finger there. Second Amendment, probably familiar with this one, gives us the right to bear arms, which is a fancy way of saying we have the right to own a gun. It also says that the state can have a militia and defend itself. So in a non-threatening manner, we've got 2 fingers to make up a finger gun there, 2 fingers for the Second Amendment. Third Amendment. This is one we don't think about too often because, fortunately, we don't have to. It says that essentially we are not required to have soldiers in our house. Back in the day, the British were trying to save money by forcing the American colonists to keep soldiers in their houses and feed them and give them somewhere to sleep instead of building forts. We got rid of that when we got our own country. We're not required to have soldiers in our house anymore. And for this one, I've got 3 fingers for soldiers kind of slowly marching there. That's my Third Amendment signal with 3 fingers. Fourth Amendment, you might also be familiar with. This protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures. We talked about this a lot in Unit 5. It says essentially that the police must have a warrant to enter our homes, or that they cannot take our property papers or us or take our rights away without a valid warrant based on probable cause, which is a legal term for saying with good reason. We go more into the ins and outs of that in Unit 5, but that's the basic ideas. This is what a warrant looks like over here on the left, and on the right we see some police officers training for serving a warrant. And for that, I've got my 4 fingers here knocking on a door. Because you got to have your Fourth Amendment, the police got to knock that and have a warrant. Fifth Amendment also was talked about in Unit 5. It protects us from being held from committing a crime unless they are properly indicted. We start to get into the rights of the accused here. It also says that you cannot be tried twice for the same crime. That's called double jeopardy. You do not have to testify against yourself. That's the freedom from self-incrimination. Another way of saying this is that you have the right to remain silent. Which is where we get my 5 fingers here, that you can remain silent and put your hand over your mouth and you won't get in trouble. You don't have to answer anybody's questions. Moving on to Sixth Amendment, we're over halfway there. The Sixth Amendment guarantees you the right to a speedy trial, which means they can't just keep you in jail without giving you a trial. You have the right to an impartial jury. Impartial means that they don't already have opinions about you. They don't already think you're guilty. They also must give you the chance to confront your witnesses. To confront witnesses against you and confront the accuser of the crime that they say that you committed. So you have the chance, either you or your lawyer can question the people who say that you did something wrong. And you have the right to an attorney. And if you cannot afford one, one will be provided for you for free. So the Sixth Amendment, again, is kind of the rights of the accused and the right to a speedy trial. I'm not wearing a watch right now, but that's kind of showing that the courts are on a clock. They have to move quickly. They can't just keep you in jail. They have to give you a speedy trial. Moving on to the Seventh Amendment, it gives you the right to a civil trial. This is a little bit different, and hopefully you remember this from Unit 5, but a civil trial is when you want to try to sue somebody else, even if they didn't necessarily break a law. So, for example, maybe you sue somebody if they run into you with your car, you get into an accident and they refuse to pay. Maybe you sue someone who builds a fence on your property and then refuses to move it after it's built. Maybe you sue somebody if your landlord has been taking too much money, then you can sue them. Again, mostly civil cases deal with issues of finance, but not always. So I've actually got a new symbol here. It's when you hold your 5 fingers out. I'm going to try and do this on the screen. And then you take 2 fingers to get money out of somebody else's pocket. So you've got money with 7 fingers leaving somebody else, and you can take it for yourself thanks to the Seventh Amendment. Eighth Amendment also deals with courts. This one deals with people in their sentencing. It says that you are free from cruel and unusual punishment. And it also says that bails cannot be overly excessive. So let's say someone is in trouble for robbing a 7-Eleven and they get $50, then their bail should not be $1 million. Another way of saying this is that the punishment should fit the crime. In Unit 5, we talked about whether you thought that the electric chair was cruel and unusual. Currently, Missouri does allow for the use of the death penalty as of this recording, and probably will be for a while. Something cruel and unusual would be forcing someone to maybe say having their hand chopped off. In some countries today, still, people who are found guilty of theft, of stealing from somebody else, can have their arms chopped off. It would be really unusual if you were sentenced to dance around like a ballerina, which is what you see right underneath my face here. And you can see with 8 fingers, 8 for the Eighth Amendment, that would be cruel and unusual. So I've got my 8 fingers there. Ninth Amendment, we're almost done. Ninth Amendment says that all rights not stated in the Constitution and not forbidden by the Constitution belong to the people. So essentially, it means that you have more rights than what are listed in the Constitution. This is where we get ideas such as the right to privacy. And you can see I'm happy. I've got my 9 fingers on myself because I am happy that I have more rights. And lastly, the 10th Amendment states that any power not granted to the federal government belongs to the states or to the people. Again, this is where we get the reserved powers clause. It says that the states can do what they want if the Constitution does not forbid it. So the states get to make their own laws about lots of things. One thing, for example, Missouri is famous for is gambling. It's not legalized in many states around our country. We get our nickname from it, the Show Me State. So that is something that Missouri has allowed, and that's thanks to the 10th Amendment. That's me with my 10 fingers telling the government to stay away. They're only supposed to do what is in the Constitution. All right, that is the end of our video. Our next one will be optional. So the next video in this playlist is going to be optional. It'll look like this. It'll be labeled the later amendments. If you want to know more about your rights, please watch. If you want to skip this one, technically you can. It won't be on the Constitution test. You can go straight to the Missouri government video in the playlist. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day. And don't forget, you can always ask me questions if you need anything clarified or if you want some more examples. Thanks. Bye.